rotting on the throne, how the last Luxembourg of the Holy Roman Empire died in fear and its own excreta. On the 2nd of November, on the damp night of the Feast of All the Dead, when the fog hung over Mainz like a shroud, Emperor Wenceslas IV was found in his chambers with torn skin on his palms and traces of excrement on his bed. He had called out to no one, struck a bell, or asked for help. According to his bodyguard, Gans von Titz, the door was closed from the inside with a wooden bolt, and an abomination stank from underneath. He was found sitting on his bed, half naked, with his eyes staring into the void. The servants swore they had heard him talking to someone in an unintelligible tongue and laughing during the night, as if there was someone else with him. Emperor Wenceslas, the last of the Luxembourgs, had not ruled the Holy Roman Empire for real for a long time. He was drinking. He was shaking. He refused to leave the palace. But it wasn't just the decline of a sovereign. It was the slow dissolution of body, power, and mind. It all began in the summer of that year, when news reached Prague that a Czech heretic had been publicly hanged in Regensburg on the orders of the Bishop of Passau. Wenceslas did not react. He had not left the western part of the castle for 3 months, gave no audience, and according to the apothecary, did not know what time of year it was. The windows in his chambers were curtained with cloth. The air there was stale with sweat, mold, and excrement, according to the recollections of the physician, Conrad from Brunau. Entering the rooms of His Imperial Majesty, I could hardly breathe, for the stench was akin to rotten meat and fermented milk, but it was ordered not to ventilate. Medical care was limited to the application of wolf's bile, frequent bloodletting, rubbing with vinegar and dried moss. Every day he was visited by a bald monk who recited incantations against the black toad that had taken up residence in his stomach, as Wenceslas himself called the pain in his lower abdomen. He shrieked at being touched, would not let the ulcers be bandaged, and ordered to bring himself honey, which he immediately spewed back. Servants wrote, "The emperor neither eats nor sleeps. He talks to the late empress and searches under his pillow for a snake." His body was rotting before he died. Sores appeared on his skin, especially in the groin and on the inside of his thighs. The attending monk mentioned in a note, "Pus with an admixture of blackness and blood, with the odor of rotten onions. No ointments helped, only increased the burning." And Wenceslas himself begged to stop, but only for a moment, after which he asked for burning again. Later it turned out that he was suffering from furunculosis, complicated by sugar rot. In the language of those years, it meant curse of the flesh. One of the paramedics tried to open the ulcer with a knife, but Václav bit him and then ordered him to cut off his ear for sacrilege. All this took place against the background of the disappearance of real power. The Reichstag at Nuremberg met without him. The electors nominated a new candidate, but it was as if Wenceslas himself didn't notice. He ordered to write letters to the dead, especially to his father, Charles IV, claiming that he knows how to get him out of hell. The chronicler Peter of Znaim noted that the emperor's last letters were covered with dark stains, presumably feces. There were rumors that his poison was poisoned by his brother, Sigismund, to speed up the transition of the crown. Others said that his illness was punishment for his ties with the Hussites and his refusal of the papal bull. On several occasions, charcoal inscriptions appeared on the palace door. God's judgment is coming for him. On one occasion, a dead bird was found in the toilet bowl with its eyes torn out, and a note that read, "He will die before he can confess." After that, access to the chambers was restricted. Only 3 servants, a doctor, a monk, and 2 bodyguards were left. The body continued to deteriorate. The skin on the legs began to peel off. There was an ominous whooshing sound when he breathed. He was delirious, saw fire under the floor, and asked everyone not to walk barefoot in the rooms. From the diary of a senior servant, "Today His Majesty ordered the windows to be sealed up, for devils are climbing through them. He cut himself to let the spirits out." A few days later, he lost control of his urination. The floors were doused, and palace rats began to appear in the bedroom. During the night, one of his bodyguards ran away, claiming to have heard the emperor speaking in the voices of 3 women at the same time. When temperatures began to drop in October, the rotting accelerated. A black ulcer opened up on his chest. The smell became so unbearable that the monks refused to enter without tar-soaked bandages. Feldsher Jacob Holtzmann wrote, "Death refused to take him away. It seemed to be waiting for him to finally melt in his own feces." Wenceslas did not die immediately. He had been unconscious for the last 3 days, but his breathing persisted, sparse, hoarse, as if it was spewing out of his insides with decay. His heart stopped in the early morning hours of November 6th. It took 5 men to carry the body out. Skin was separating from muscle. One of the porters later fell ill and died, presumably from blood poisoning. The rite was not performed in time. The corpse began to decompose before the monks finished reciting the prayers. Embalming was not possible. All that was left of the body was a thick, dark slurry, which the monks ordered to be burned in a closed box. It was officially declared sudden cardiac arrest. Soon, the struggle for the throne began. Sigismund was recognized as emperor, but with difficulty. Hussite supporters rose up in Bohemia, claiming that Wenceslaus had been murdered by supporters of the Pope. His death created a rift between the German princes and the Bohemian nobility. The electors called for a new council, and city rumors said the empire rotted with him. From a letter of the Bishop of Trier, "He is not dead, he has disappeared, like a feces flushed into the night." And then came famine, massacres, and brother against brother. In the first days after the death of Wenceslas IV, the palace in Prague was sealed. By order of Sigismund, the brother of the deceased, no one had the right to enter the chambers of the late emperor without the written permission of the Arch-Chancellor. The reason was not only for security reasons. The odor emanating from the West Wing was so thick that even after the remains of the body had been burned, the fabrics, furniture, and stone walls continued to emit rot. A servant involved in the removal of the bed later recalled that the marble was darker than before, and the wood as if it had absorbed the meat. Several attempts at cleaning failed, and eventually the rooms were simply walled up, with a prayer of exorcism recited over them. Meanwhile, the body was not placed in a coffin, as required by protocols. It was cremated at night, without witnesses. One of the monks present said in a private confession, "While the body was lying on the stone, insects crawled towards it. Some were white as milk, with horns. I saw them crawling into his mouth." This testimony was later recorded by the Jesuit Gerhard of Leipzig, commenting a symbol of the decomposition of spirit and flesh. During the same period, a purge of Wenceslas's entourage began. 2 servants were hanged for insulting the memory of the emperor, officially for stealing goblets, but witnesses claimed they knew of Wenceslas's last letters and said that he asked to abdicate the throne and retire to a monastery. This was politically dangerous. Any mention of abdication destroyed the legitimacy of the Luxembourg line. Sigismund, arriving in Prague 9 days after the cremation, first demanded the reports of the doctor and monk who had cared for the deceased. Neither had survived. The monk was found hanged in his cell, leaving a note. He came by. He asked me to open the windows. The doctor disappeared and his belongings were thrown into the river. Later, bags of silver, probably bribes for silence, were found in the medics' homes. All documents about Wenceslas's treatment were burned. However, one monastery has preserved a copy of a note from Conrad of Brunau, given to the Bishop of Passau. It said, "The emperor suffered from putrefactive decomposition of internal organs, ulcers on the skin, necrosis in the area of the perineum, hallucinations and periodic blindness. I used decoction of oak bark, ammonia, mercury infusion, and bloodletting up to twice a day. There was no help. Perhaps the affliction is caused by eating tainted meat or by a poison that slowly affects the insides." Immediately after his death, a struggle for the remnants of influence began. The old Bohemian nobility accused Sigismund of usurpation. The Hussites regarded Wenceslas as a martyr who had been poisoned for sympathizing with the poor. Catholics in Prague were forced to conceal the origin of the orders for fear of unrest. Charcoal inscriptions began to appear in the streets. "He will rise again. He has not forgiven you." The people believed that Wenceslas was killed because he refused to support the execution of heretics. One rumor claimed that before his death, he ordered the release of captive preachers and the closing of monasteries. Such behavior caused consternation in church circles. One of the most frightening episodes occurred on the 40th day after his death, during the recitation of the Requiem Mass. The priest saying Wenceslas' name suddenly collapsed, losing consciousness. Black blood came out of his nose, and he died an hour later. The people whispered that Wenceslas's soul is taking revenge. After that, the emperor's name was never mentioned at Mass again. Secret reports from Vienna said that Sigismund did not dare to enter Prague in triumph because the fear and rot had not yet been weathered. A letter from the Danish ambassador read, "I have seen bodies decomposed in a week, but I have never seen rot remain in the walls. Here it is alive." Illnesses began to break out among the inner circle. One of the marshals, who slept in the room of the former emperor, was found dead with sores on his face. His wife was seen in tears, whispering, "He is cursed." There were reports that even furniture removed from the palace was beginning to give off an odor of rotten meat. In Leipzig, people refused to buy oak chairs belonging to the deceased. Merchants burned fabrics so as not to attract contagion. The servants of the temple in Melnik wrote in the chronicles, "The emperor's death did not bring peace. It revealed something worse. His soul did not ascend. It settled to the ground like pus in a wound." Wenceslas' body was not buried with honors. His name was erased from coins. The church refused to canonize him, and courtiers avoided speaking of him aloud. A few years later, however, when civil war broke out in Bohemia, Many recalled his last words, supposedly spoken in delirium. "After me, there will be only cold and ashes." The new power took hold, but not for long. Sigismund failed to unite the empire. The death of Wenceslas put an end to the Luxembourg family in a direct line. The era of their reign, plunged into fear, decay, and oblivion, is remembered as a time when the walls rotted and God was silent. In the spring of the following year, when the snow was still on the roofs of the monasteries, Prague began to talk about Wenceslas again. The rumors didn't seem to die with his body. On the contrary, they spread like his sores. In the main square, where they were afraid to go out after sunset, the townspeople whispered, "He is not dead. He was hidden." There were even those who claimed to have seen the emperor at night at the cathedral walls. He stood as if alive in a stained white shirt, with an untied belt and traces of soot on his hands. The church, to stop the spread of these stories, ordered the arrest of the blasphemers and preachers of fear. But it wasn't enough. Sigismund himself ordered the collection of Wenceslas's archives, scrutinizing personal correspondence, reports, oaths, anything that might shed light on his final weeks. But what was found only increased the alarm. Among the papers was a fragment of a note covered in grease stains and dried slime. "I can't feel my fingers. They are rotting. The meat is peeling off like the skin of a boiled fish. I pray, not for a soul, but for silence. They whisper in the corners. They call me by a name I don't have." The handwriting was hesitant, and some of the letters were written as if written with the left hand. The archivist who examined the text later became blind in both eyes. His testimony is preserved in the records. Everything he wrote was true. He knew he was dying, not as a man, but as a sign. He was not rotting. He was dissolving between this world and the other. Soon, outbreaks of a strange fever began in Teplis, on the outskirts of the Czech crown. The illness was accompanied by skin rashes, hallucinations, and kidney failure. People said it was black flesh, a disease that came from a dead monarch. Some called it the curse without a throne. Wenceslas's entourage was the first to be affected. The maid who held his night pot had a swollen face and rotting teeth. The cook had pus coming out of his eyes, and one of the soldiers had ulcers on his body that were exactly like those described by the physician Conrad of Brunau. The entire west side of the castle was blocked off and later burned. Even the walls were not saved from fear. Meanwhile, Sigismund's power was faltering. He expected a rapid consolidation, but was faced with Hussite revolt, popular hatred, and alienation of the electors. A letter from the Bishop of Würzburg stated, "He has become emperor over the ashes, but he himself dare not sleep without a lamp. They say he locks himself up at night and sprinkles holy water on his bed. They say he hears his brother's voice." The political situation was becoming more complicated. The electors of the Rhine refused to recognize the legitimacy of Sigismund's authority, insinuating that Wenceslas had died an unnatural death. A secret report from a Saxon councillor stated, "He was poisoned, but not poison was the cause. He was broken by fear, isolated, torn by incessant oscillation between loyalty and heresy. His last nights were torture without an executioner." Panic was growing among the nobility. Several nobles committed suicide. One, Count von Altenburg, threw himself out of a window shouting, He's coming for me. He won't forgive me. His court priest claimed at his trial that the count was involved in a plot to remove Wenceslaus. A maid who had been caring for the dying man was found with her throat slit in the monastery of St. Agatha. According to the abbess, she claimed in recent days to have heard someone calling her to a windowless room. Paranoia permeated the very structure of power. At court, everyone feared touching the seals of the late emperor. Rumors claimed that Wenceslaus signed some documents with his own blood. A treatise by the monk Joachim of Bamberg said, "He made a covenant, not with princes, but with pain. He became a vessel of what words cannot describe. Even death did not return him to the earth. It pushed him out, and now he wanders among signs and symbols." It was during this period that a split in the clergy occurred. One part demanded that Wenceslaus be rehabilitated, even posthumously, for the sake of peace. The other insisted that he should be damned for sympathizing with heretics. Churches prayed for atonement for the error of the throne. Some ministers held secret masses in his memory, for which they were later condemned as apostates. Sigismund, in an attempt to stabilize the situation, moved his residence to Budapest, avoiding Prague. But his own health began to deteriorate rapidly. His physician wrote that the emperor suffered from trembling hands, insomnia, nosebleeds, and fits of unreasonable terror. The popular rumor went, rotting is transmitted by blood. Yet the worst effects were not in the body, but in the soul. The people believed that with Wenceslaus, not just a generation had died, the very order of things had died. If the emperor could rot alive, pray and not be heard, then God was either blind or turned away. This realization became the ground for religious radicalism. In the following years, the First Hussite War broke out under this banner. The church tried to silence the fact of Wenceslaus's suffering, but in the annals, there was evidence. And even years later, pilgrims came to the burnt chambers. They didn't pray. They looked. They whispered, as if they could still hear something from inside the wall. By the following summer, the stench was gone from the walls, but the fear remained. Prague had changed. The streets were quieter. The houses on the way to the former palace were empty. People avoided saying Wenceslaus' name out loud. His portraits were destroyed. Monasteries were secretly ordered to burn any documents that mentioned his last days. Sigismund's power was strengthened, but not by love, but by the fear that the same thing would happen under him. The empire lived in a state of suppressed tension, as if expecting rot to sprinkle from the ceilings again. Meanwhile, a group of monastic scribes in Alsace recovered fragments of the surviving records of the emperor's death. Among them is an excerpt from a diary, presumably belonging to a cardinal from Bamberg, who arrived at Wenceslaus's house 3 weeks before the end. He does not recognize himself in the mirror. He sees in it his father, his brother, his dead wife. He says they are standing by his bed. In the night, he hears thumps. He claims that an angel has come for him, but the angel is wearing rotten boots and holding a dog's head. These records leaked outside the monastery and were distributed as forbidden leaflets. Some believed them to be forgeries, but too much matched the stories of the survivors. Wenceslaus' name was becoming a symbol of his fall, not only bodily, but also spiritually. He was no longer human. He was feared as a reminder that even the anointed one could die, leaving behind not glory, but stench. Archival records showed that in the last months of his life, Wenceslas tried to revoke his own decrees, bring back exiled preachers, and distribute some of the treasury to the poor. His servants claimed that he whispered of a terrible judgment and inky devils who would write down everything. Some historians later speculated that he suffered from a severe form of kidney failure, accompanied by uremic encephalopathy. This explained his delusions, seizures, stinky body odor, and ulcers. But during his lifetime, no one knew the diagnosis or the meaning of what was happening, only the horror. Wenceslas's death changed not only politics, but also the very image of the emperor. After him, every monarch feared not rebellion or assassination, but that he would die like this, slowly in his own excretions, forgotten, cursed, like a rag thrown out of a castle. Subsequently, German rulers began to build separate rooms for the dying, away from the palace, away from sight. A new term appeared in the speeches of the monastery doctors: Wenceslaus disease, meaning gradual moral and bodily decay against the background of loss of power. Sigismund, his brother, outlived him by only 10 years. Before his death, he ordered that he should not be called emperor, but simply sinful son. He willed that his body be wrapped in a simple shroud and buried unmarked. His last word, according to a monk's testimony, was, "He is waiting." Wenceslas's story became forbidden. In the official chronicles, his name was bypassed. His image was not included in the royal galleries, but still, in the churches of Bohemia, old wives were sometimes heard whispering by candlelight, "He who is rotting will return." He was not glorified, he was not cursed, just forgotten, like a nightmare that you wake up in a cold sweat and don't want to remember. But forgetting doesn't mean getting rid of it. The empire was never the same again. After Wenceslas, each successive ruler kept around not only a doctor and a priest, but also an apothecary with a sack of opium in case the rot started. And if you believe one of the few surviving testimonies recorded by a traveling scribe in Upper Bohemia, in the room where the emperor died, candles do not burn. They are extinguished by the air. Thus ended the Luxembourg era, not with battle, not with triumph, but with stench and fear of their own flesh.